Hello there. Hello. Hi. Today I'm going to try to explain a problem that I continually have with drawing for a client especially, is trying to convey to the client the degree of detail I can get in a drawing. Now I can draw, let's say my drawing is going to be 1 inch by 2 inches. So I'm using this graph paper to show it how this will work. And let's say I'm drawing a house. And for lack of a better term, a better house to draw, let's pretend it's something like the White House. So it has 3 stories, a portico, columns, a moronic president inside. We won't show him. But what I'm doing to explain this to you is by using my reproduction pen set, which I haven't used in nearly 30 years because they are evil. But I'm showing you using these because I've filled up pens that have very specific point sizes, so you know I'm not going to do any trickery with my fountain pens. But so let's just draw 3 different White Houses here. Let's say it's 1 inch by 2. We'll just use this graph paper here. So here's one White House, and I'm not going to draw the whole thing, but there's the archway thing. We've got, I don't know how many windows we have. Let's just say we have 2 windows each. So this is sort of what it looks like, and you've got the railings on the top and the chandelier and the door and the limousine out front. And these have little porticos on little, archways above the windows. Anyway, blah blah blah. Okay, so let's now deal with how we're going to draw this thing. And I'm going to draw 3 of them right on top of each other here. We'll just pretend that it was made larger by 3 times. So we have a portico, portico, portico. I'm doing this and I'm just going to draw 1 window on each side, just because I don't want to have to draw the whole darn thing. So these are our plans. Now, a question I have for a client is, how big is it going to be printed? Big. How big? It's going to be huge, huge. How big is it going to be when it's printed? How is it going to be printed? Is it going to be engraved? Is it going to be embroidered on a shirt? Is it going to be, plastered on the side of a billboard? How big is it going to be? And then how is it going to be printed? Will it be engraved, letterpress, embroidered on a shirt? So let's just use those 3. So let's assume they're all going to be the same size. They're all going to be this big. So this one is going to be engraved. This one is going to be letterpress. This one is going to be embroidered. So the engraving has the most amount of detail in it. And I'm going to, hopefully, I've loaded these up with ink, so I'm able to draw with them. Okay, so here we go. So essentially, I'm able to use the finest pen points to make the drawing. So I'm drawing little volutes above the windows, above the columns. Here's the window. Here's the little archway above the window. I don't know if they have shutters on the White House or not, but I'll draw the panes of glass, etc., etc. Then there's a front door, and then there's this chandelier held up by some chains, and they're up here at the top. God, I can see why I don't use these pens, because they're just evil. There's, balustrades, which are very, very, excuse me, very fussy. They've got, the balustrades have a shape to them, like this, but you don't see that here because it's so tiny. So here's how it might be engraved. And if you zoom in, if I zoom in, you'll see, you know, the detail I can get. Okay, now letterpress. Letterpress is very much like engraving, except usually the lines that I can use for them, I ask the printer, you know, how small, how thin can the lines be? And they say it has to be, you know, 1/16 of an inch or a, you know, 1/8 of an inch or whatever, you know, 32nd of an inch. And this is, again, not working. Come on. Oh, damn you. Okay. So now this one, this pen is twice as fat as this pen. So now look at what it looks like. You know, I draw these lines and, you know, it becomes much less delicate. You know, if I make a volute, I'm drawing the same kind of line work that I made up here, except I've got a fatter pen, and it all fills in dark. It would be like putting makeup on with a paintbrush, house painting brush, not an artist brush, but you know, something that or a paint roller. You know, how nice is that going to look, ladies? So then we have our, you know, our balustrades. See, then what happens here is the balustrade, this looks really too dark, much too dark. Not like the real delicacy that you normally see. So I'd probably, rather than drawing an outline around the balustrade like this, I'll represent the balustrade by just a dot. And the dot sort of looks more like it's the negative space, and the white area that's left looks like the balustrade. But you can see the problem that we're dealing with. You know, the cruder, we'll call it cruder, the more delicate the process that it's printed, the more delicate I can be. The cruder, I have to be cruder, and I have to draw it differently. Now, if it was going to be embroidered, the embroiderer will tell me, okay, we can embroider the White House on a cap or a t-shirt or something, but our lines cannot be any thinner than, you know, the mallet of the polo guy. So I'm dealing with a line that's now this thick. It's twice as big as this. This one was twice that. This one is twice this. And, you know, if I'm going to draw this, I mean, how do I even draw that window? It just becomes, the details completely go away. You know, I'm forced to make it very simple, because if I make it more subtle, it'll just turn all black. The house will be a black house, not a white house. So if I try to draw that volute above the column, it's going to be just a big dot. So how do I draw that? You know, how do I represent that in this drawing? Well, maybe I'll end up trying to draw sort of I'll imply a shadow. I mean, I have to completely rethink how I want to draw this image, because I'm dealing with something so clumsy as a big fat tool. So I hope that this explains why I ask the questions: how big is it going to be printed, and how is it going to be printed? I often get clients too that, you know, they don't live in the White House, but they live in an absolutely huge house, and it might, you know, have dormers, and, you know, it's a McMansion, and they've got, you know, a big great room here, and usually they have a big old fugly garage door right next to it, but anyway, we'll ignore that. We'll pretend their garage is in the back. So it's a two-story house. It's a, you know, colonial revival, you know, whatever big mansions are made to look like now. They're just ugly. And people will say, oh, I love our doorway. The doorway is so beautiful. Okay, the doorway, if I walk up to the doorway, I see their double door, their little stained glass window, leaded glass windows here. I see the the molding on the doors. I see a beautiful doorknob. I see all this detail. Above the door they have a little transom that has leaded glass with, grapes and grape leaves, and then they have a portico above that, and then they have all of this. So this is what they want to be represented in this drawing. And it's great. I love that. I love that house. I love that door. Okay, so it's going to be 1 inch tall and 2 inches wide, engraved on the top of a piece of stationery. So how big is this going to be? Well, first of all, the roof is going to take up 2/3 of this. Here's our dormer. Here's our chimney. Here's our portico. Then we've got the second stories here. Then we've got the first floor. Now the door is not as tall as the entire floor. There's a portico and there's a thing and there's a thing. And the first floor, the door, and there's some steps. And there's columns on either side. So now suddenly this entire thing that has all this detail that they want me to represent is maybe 1/4 of an inch tall or 1/8 of an inch tall. And they want me to draw the doorknob. Well, there's not a pen on the planet that's thin enough to draw a doorknob. So I do some tricks. I sometimes will, and then sometimes they want me to draw the trees around the house. And the trees are actually like 3 times larger than the house is, but I shrink the trees. But now this entire thing has to be still 1 inch tall. So now the house is 1/2 inch tall, and each floor is 1/4 inch tall, so now it's even smaller. So you have to decide what you want, and you have to understand how small the item is going to be when it's printed. The printed item, the printed image, is going to be 1 inch tall. And if I have to use a paintbrush to illustrate it, that's one thing. If I use a thin, tiny pen and it's going to be engraved, that's another thing. So it's really important to understand that when I ask you these questions, I'm asking you for a very specific reason why I need to draw it the way I draw it. Now, what happens, let's pretend I drew a White House as big as it is on a $20 bill, which maybe is about this big. Maybe not quite that big. And that's also engraved. Beautiful engraving. Beautiful. It's huge. And let's pretend that you have to reduce it to half the size for some reason. And it's fine. It'll still look okay, but if it's going to be reproduced in black and white in line, the little tiny lines are going to disappear, or they're going to fill up. There'll be 2 tiny lines next to each other, and they'll just turn into one big line. They're either going to disappear or they're going to get clunkier. So oftentimes when I do a drawing of a house, let's say for a business, it's a storefront, and they want an image that's going to be on a brochure, and they want one they want on their letterhead, and they might even want a third one on their business cards. Well, a business card is this big, roughly. Blah, 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 president, blah, 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 phone number, fax, etc. And right here they want the storefront. Well, that's this big. On their stationery, it might be twice that big. And on their brochure, it might be 3 times as big. Well, I could use this drawing I designed for this. Can be enlargeable and probably look okay. If it's enlarged to this, it's going to look like I used a really big fat magic marker. And why didn't I draw something more delicate? If I start this way and work down, it'll turn into mud. If I start here and go down and go up, that might work. But oftentimes I will suggest you need 2 drawings. One that's going to be printed small, one that's going to be printed large. Usually what I ask is, when it's printed small, how small will it be? And I'll start with that one. And hopefully I'll hit the nail on the head and we can move on to the larger ones. It's anyway, it's really important for me to know, and for me, this before I sharpen my pencil or fill up my pens with ink. I really need to know how it's going to be printed, and I need to know what size it's going to be. And then I'll use both parts of my brain to come up with suggestions as to how it can be drawn to look good. And you know, if you really, for example, if you really love this front door and the doorknob and the stained glass window, I might suggest, rather than drawing the entire house, let's just draw the front door. What's wrong with that? And that might be all you need. And then many times that's all I have drawn. Or the doorknob. If you just want the doorknob, I can certainly just draw that. And that sometimes can represent a big house. When someone does have a big house, I often do say, well, what elements of the house is it that you want me to draw? And oftentimes, you know, I'm doing a project now where all of the pictures I got of the house were beautiful pictures of the house within this forest. The man, you know, moved his house, or had it built rather, within a forest, and they went through great trouble not to cut down any trees, or as few trees as possible, to build this house. And I could tell that by the pictures he sent me, that he really loved those trees, and almost as much as he loved the house. So I said, let's make sure we put the trees in. And so, you know, here's our design. And, you know, I sent the design off, and he said, well, what about the doorknob? He didn't say that specifically, but something like that. What about the details on the house? Well, I can't show both the way it's printed. I have to show one or the other. I can make the trees smaller, but it won't look like it's in a forest. It'll look like it's in a subdivision. So anyway, I try to ask questions that I hope you don't find annoying, and I hope that you have passionate answers. Because if you're passionate about that doorknob, we'll draw that doorknob. If you love those trees, I'll draw those trees. If you want it embroidered on your cap, I'll create something that'll look great on your cap. Anyway, thank you. Now I can empty these. These pens are evil, by the way, for any number of reasons, but I think here's a way where I can show you very easily what I mean by the thickness of the line, because I am drawing with something that has no variation. When I'm using my usual fountain pen, how I normally draw is using a pen that has variation in line quality based on pressure or direction or both, and I can get thick and thin. But when things are being printed, you know, I need to know more exactly the line thinness. So anyway, blah blah blah. So these pens, if you didn't have to hold them straight up and down, the pens would be better, but you can't draw on the side. You have to hold them straight up and down, so your big old hand gets in the way of what you're doing, and what fun is that? So I have to make sure I put the right cap on the right pen. These all have color-coded numbering system and stuff. And anyway, I hope this explained it. I'll try to explain it a little bit better in a different video as well, but this one shows most of what I wanted to convey. Thank you for watching. Toodaloo.